Thing Paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Coming to you live and direct from my subterranean lair. My name is Ra, and I'm here to awaken the dormant particles that are spiraling inside your DNA. So come with me as we go further down the mystical spiral of life. It's Spiral Radio, where each and every week we unveil the different shades of you and the different shades of me until we all vibrate the same frequency. I want to welcome everybody tonight. We got a great guest lined up. He's a friend of the show. We've had him on before. It's Gary Wayne. He's the author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and he is a encyclopedia of supernatural and amazing, interesting information always. He's such a inspiration and joy to have on. And we have a beautiful Virgo moon tonight that's transferring into Libra. And it's just a joy to have Gary Wayne, and I want to welcome to Spiral Radio once again Gary Wayne. And everybody, before we have Gary on, just to let you know that Gary will be back on June 30th for a Fallen Angel Friday. And how's it going tonight, Gary?
Going very well, and really excited to be here tonight to talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. I think the audience is going to really be interested in what we're going to discuss.
Yeah, and not too many people, some of the topics that we choose to go down the spiral of, not too many people seem to be talking about some of these as of late. And I think that one of the topics that we want to mention has been a hot topic as of late. But the certain aspect that we're going to go down, I haven't heard too many people talk about. But then that's the topic of the giants or the Nephilim. And now if anybody has been into this topic as of late, it seems to have exploded over the last few years. But if you look back in history, I mean, ever since the turn of the century, the early 1900s, they were finding giant bones all over North America that were basically taken by the Smithsonian and covered up. So this giant lore is everywhere from Native American culture to European culture, to everywhere. So it's going to be interesting to hear what you've come up with, Gary, and stuff that I can add, because I even find that my family, who comes from Italian and got a lot of their information and culture from the Etruscans, they say that they got their information from the Persians, and so when we go back and see that a lot of this information and lore came from ancient Persia, originally. And it's said that these ancient Persians, when people ask them where they got this information from, they say a mysterious star people.
Well, either star people, or I think what they actually called them were more like Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And so then whatever your interpretation of what Anunnaki are they gods? Are they aliens? Are they fallen angels?
Seraphim or Draco?
Seraphim, yeah. I'll leave that to the audience to decide, but they definitely refer to the Anunnaki as the ones who, gave them civilization and produced life for the Sumerians, and some people believe either through copulation or through DNA manipulation, but they were the ones who provided the knowledge and the civilization, and possibly even the first human beings according to Sumerian belief.
Yeah, and I mean, basically in Sumeria they talk about Enki and Enlil, how they're like these genetic manipulators, and they're brothers fighting over territory and rule, and a lot of people think that that's where the serpent and the eagle and the bird clans come from. Enki being the serpent clan and Enlil being the bird clan, and a lot of symbology is linked to that. But what I'm really interested in getting, see what you came up with too about this ancient Persian giants and the lore of the giants there, because as far back as I can remember, I've always heard tales of giants, and all these tales of giants. Even I go to a yearly Native American festival here in New York. It's in upstate New York, and they talk about and it's interesting because they call themselves actually Indians. They're comfortable with being called Indians here in New York, the New York Indian, like up in the upstate New York in the Northeast. They actually call themselves Indians, so they're not really uncomfortable with that word for some reason. Even in Long Island, they called themselves the Montauk Indians, and a lot of them still reference themselves that way. But I've gone probably around 10, 15 years the first week in August every year to this Native American festival, and I've gotten to know some of the elders and really well, and some of them really trust me, and we talk, and they talk about these red-haired giants that would come down from the mountains and snatch women up from the tribe and run back to the mountains with them. And sometimes the warriors of the Indian tribe would try to defend against these giants, and the giants would rip heads off and be brutally crazy with them. So after a while, the Indians or Native Americans, they saw these giants, coming, grabbing the women. So eventually they started to tail these giants back to the mountains instead of trying to fight them, to see where they were taking these women. So they tailed them to the mountains, and they saw these giants performing weird rituals, like sex rituals with these women, and being cannibalistic with them as well. So, and we're talking about giants with red hair, 14 to 15, maybe even 20 feet tall, double rows of teeth, stunk like, they said, like a skunk or like rotting flesh, and they were just monsters according to, humanity, what we are. And, it's interesting too, Gary, because there's this, I don't know if you've heard this story, and I think L.A. Marzulli had the guy on, but they had his face cloaked. I saw it on YouTube for a couple of minutes. It was a military underground, like a mission, like a black ops kind of mission. And they were
Afghanistan.
Yes, exactly. And the first team went lost, and they sent the second team, and they confronted this huge red-haired giant, and he had a pole, like a spear that was like massive, and he speared one guy, and then the rest of them like got the movement of this giant. They said was so fast and so it threw them off, even though they've been trained to respond to certain situations. That they said the quick movement of this giant and the agility of him actually froze them in fear. So he was able to come up and spear one of them right away, And then they were all yelling like, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. So they all started shooting like machine guns at his face. And then finally they brought him down. But I don't know how true that is and how we can prove it. But supposedly that first...
Those details run so closely with descriptions of giants, both before and after the flood. And so, from the hair color, there was 2 hair colors of these giants. One would be red hair, and typically they would come with hazel or green eyes, and they had pale skin. And then the other one was blonde hair and blue-eyed with pale skin.
Yeah.
And they were monsters, as you said. Yeah. They were, anywhere from, original ones anywhere from 14 to 20 feet. Some people speculate the original generation was maybe 30 to 40 feet, but we don't have any sort of corroboration of that. But what is also important to understand is they just weren't tall. These were the average height of a human today is, on a height to width ratio 2 to 1. These were 3 to 1. So they were 50% broader, and they were muscular. And, I do a quick estimation in my book as to, about the size of them. And, I'm basically saying, on the smaller side of the giants, let's say around a Goliath size, which would have been 9 feet 9 inches or just over 11, depending on how you measure the
he was a lot smaller. Yeah.
He was, than what we're talking about. But even at that level, they would have like a shoe size that would be over size 30, and they would be well over 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds.
I mean, didn't they say Goliath had? Didn't they say Goliath? I didn't mean to cut you off. Didn't they say Goliath had like hundreds of pounds of armor on him too?
Yes, and he had a harem of servants to carry it when he wasn't wearing it. Right? I mean, one person could barely lift the spearhead. It was that heavy, and there's a weight that's given in the Bible.
Yeah,
and to be able to fight from beneath that kind of armor just tells you how strong they were. And out of Greek history, we understand that these Titan giants, because they're all the same giants, they're just different cultures talking about them, were very fleet of foot, very, very quick, and very dexterous with their hands. These weren't sideshow freaks.
Lumbering,
These were talented, fast-moving, giant, great warriors. And that's why they were called the mighty ones, or the Gibborim in the Bible. Like, they were the mighty warriors and the mighty hunters, which is why they were able to usurp power and establish the kingship dynasties both before and after the flood, because how could you stand against them?
So how certain, or what do you think the probability is that there's some of these giants here today?
Well, and there's a probability that they are here, certainly from that Afghanistan account and from the account of Native Americans, and the ideology that there's an association as it comes down through the generations that these giants would live in caves. And what's interesting about that is one of the race of giants in the Bible is called Horites. And if you take that back to its Hebrew word, it means cave dweller. And also these giants were hairy. So, and of course, the Horites were known to be very hairy, just as the Anunnaki are known to be hairy.
So you think this is where the Bigfoot lore comes in as well?
They're associated with
like an offshoot,
the Bigfoot,
like offbreed,
a different branch of a corruption of creation, if I can put it that way. But again, Bigfoot are associated with caves just as the little people are associated with caves. And just as you talked about the Native American accounts, and this is pretty common in almost every culture around the world, is they all have little people, they all have a Bigfoot type of associated being, and they also have giants in their history or their religion or their mythology, however you want to call that. And it's one of those inexplicable occurrences that happens on all continents and in all cultures.
Yeah, and even in like they say in ancient Lemurian times and Atlantis, that there was both giants and pygmy races at both the poles, South and North Pole as well.
Yeah. And I call that the sort of greater giant or the greater Nephilim concept, that there wasn't just these very strange and huge giants being created. And I don't care whether you call them Anunnaki or Maitreya or Myosi or Anak or whatever term you want to use from around the world, right? They weren't the only creation that is unexplainable in prehistory and even surviving past the flood in accounts, and certainly still alive in legend and mythology today. So there is, again, things going on in prehistory that, you know, most people don't want to look into.
I agree. And, you know, with these, it's interesting because I was talking about the Native Americans and the red-haired giants with the festival that I went to, and they said a similar thing that I've heard on another show, that somebody said that they have these wampum belts, and these wampum belts tell stories, and they're like almost like a hieroglyphic. They have symbols for a story, and one of the main wampum belts that they have at this festival is a story of giants coming down from the mountains. And now you would think now, Gary, with oral tradition, that it's almost like the game telephone. Somebody tells a story and it tells the next story and it starts to change, it starts to get more exaggerated, but that's not the case with the Native Americans. That might be the case with us now, like in, you know, our civilization, how it is, but not with the Native Americans. With the Native Americans, they choose a young boy, usually at a very young age, who shows intelligence and shows a liking to the stories and the history of the tribe, and that boy's whole life is devoted to learning these stories word by word. He's not allowed to change anything, and his whole life gets devoted to these stories. And one of the stories is of these giants and how they came down, and you know, they would follow the giants and see all these rituals going on, and this craziness, and how fast these giants were. So, you know, when they talk about this, it's not mythology to them. This is their history, Gary.
It's their history, and they believe it. And that's and just as the Greeks believe that, and just as the Romans, and it to me is very, very disrespectful to have people, to listen to people say that, well, it's just legend or mythology. Well, they don't believe that.
Same as the Hindus. You know, when you talk of you talk of Krishna and Vishnu and all of these stories in the Mahabharata, this is not mythology to them. This is their ancient history.
Yeah, and I think we should be respectful of that. Just because secular education doesn't want to recognize that, it doesn't mean that it's the only point of view. So, and I think there's, again, so much commonality that, you know, you probably, you know, would get the mathematical zero with all the different commonalities around the 5 continents around the world, and all the same types of stories that they have. So I think, you know, you can take those stories to heart. And the mountain aspect is another one of those commonalities. And of course, one of the things that sort of get included in this is wherever you have the gods, you have pyramids and you have the giants, and you also have mountains, like the 7 mountains in Chinese mythology, or Mount Olympus, or Mount Aetiops of Atlantean history. And every culture has a sacred mountain, and they're building mountains like a Mount Hermon or Mount Nippur in Sumerian history, right? So these are all commonalities, and seemingly many of the giants in most of the cultures kind of collect around the mountains as well from where they like to live, just like the Amorites and the Rephaim and the Anakim were in the hill country or the mountain country of Israel during the time of the Exodus. They just seem to cling to those mountain areas as one of those commonalities around the world.
Yes, and you know, that's interesting that you come to talk of the mountains, because there's this mountain that I want to talk about for a minute and see what we can come up with and what we can, you know, basically let's dissect this story a little bit, because in ancient Persian lore and tradition, they have this ancient mysterious mountain called Mt.Kaf, and I think Mt.Kaf is Mt.Kaf or something like that. That's how it's. I'm not sure of the actual pronunciation of that pronunciation, but it's nicknamed as Mt.Kaf. Kaf. And in ancient Persian tradition, there was two nations or races that are spoke of, and they're giants. Okay, and they talk about this ancient giant Argiak, and his name is spelled Argeak, Argiak, or something like that. And it's said that Argiak built basically a gallery of statues of these ancient giants under all of their exact form and how they were preserved and and even scenery. And they called these 72 kings the Solomons, okay? And they were the wise kings of the East. And three of these kings reigned for over 1,000 years each, okay? And they had this ancient gallery on Mt.Kaf, who was built by this Argiak. And I wanted to see what you knew about this, Gary, and what you could possibly add to this.
Well, this gallery that Argiak is being talked about having on Mt.Kaf, or Kafistan or Kafanistan, depending on which sort of version that you're looking at on it, as they name it. It had men in their various forms, the ancient men, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very, very odd sort of term, which would make sense if they're talking about giants, because, the giants, for the most part, that people would recognize had a imagery of their parents. And in this case, in a lot of the cases, they look like serpents, which is why you have all that serpent imagery. And also that these Solomons were actually of the Ari, A-R-I, or Aryan, as we might know them. And of course, the Aryans were these blonde-haired, blue-eyed survivors of the flood that sort of come out of Tartarus.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting too when you say Aryan, it's almost like Orion.
Yes, it's very, very close. And
Yes.
and the thing is vowels for the most part are inserted into the modern languages. Most of the ancient languages, whether it's Hebrew, were mostly consonant languages, right? So,
Yeah.
So you can get a very similar sound and a transliteration that can look a little bit different in the modern spelling. But if you pull the vowels out, all of a sudden you kind of get a very, very close kinship in the transliteration of those words across nations. And a lot of, one of these accounts is obviously written by, Madam or Helen Blavatsky of Theosophy.
Yes,
right?
I have
Secret Doctrines. So.
That's one of the ones that I researched it in. That's one I have three different. There's a Encyclopedia of Giants that I found it in. There's the Secret Doctrine Book 2 that I found it in. It's under the part that says the Persian Phoenix in her book.
Yeah.
I found it there, and I found it in another source that somebody emailed me. It was like a photocopy of somewhere. But
Right.
yeah, so I found it in a few sources, and she's looked at in on a bad light in some cases, but she has some true knowledge in her works.
Well, I mean, they believe it in the theosophical religion, and whether or not one agrees with that or religion or not, I mean, it's certainly what the Gnostics believe. And
Yes.
so that's part of their religion, and we're talking about sort of the world's religions here. So, but it does tend to line up with stories in the Bible as well, or other religions. And also in this gallery of statues, they had paintings of animals that were roaming before Adam.
Yeah, they had
Right?
scenery. Yeah, yes.
So what does that mean? And what type of animals were they talking about before
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah.
And so this
Exactly.
is really starts to tweak your interest as to what they were going on these two races. And I think what people overlook that this ideology that you have a gallery of statues is a bit of a strange concept, but it's not. In prehistory, it was normal to have galleries of statues, and the kings, as they progressed down through the dynasties, would have statues and galleries, just as we see that in the
Romans.
Greek gardens or the Roman gardens. And I'll make another connection to a little bit more modern, but first I'll go a little bit more historical.
We do it too.
We do it too, yeah. with all sorts of things like gnomes and other things that are all sort of related here. But Atlantis also had a three-dimensional gallery of its original demigods, of kings and queens, and to their gods and goddesses.
I mean, we do wax museum to our media gods,
Yeah, and people that believe in this bloodline of these demigods who are spawned by the gods that created these dynasties, and they believe that they're part of that bloodline today, also create these same type of genealogical galleries of statues, like the Habsburgs in Innsbruck. They have a very, very large amount of statues in there from, and some modern ones. I mean, they take it all the way back, but people might be familiar with King Arthur or Godfrey de Bouillon of the Templars, or Clovis of the Merovingian bloodline, which also takes their bloodlines back to the Giants as well in their belief system and genealogies. And so you see this statues, this gallery of gods and demigods and kings still being done today. So it's not such a strange idea that you see written here, because it was done quite commonly. And there's another one that's in the Sumerian area. I just looked up one just as a sort of complementary support for the story of Ariel. Is that in Lagash in the Akkadian Empire circa, say, 2100 BC, they had a garden of statues of their genealogies and kings. So this is a normal sort of thing that would have happened in prehistory, and not that far along, not that far, with time past. And we see that also in still happening with churches that are being built, like with Rosslyn Castle and the great Gothic cathedrals. You have all of these different statues of strange beings in there. So I would suggest that this is not that far-fetched, that it's a strong possibility that it actually happened.
Yes, and we got 3 minutes to break, so before we go to break, I'm gonna share something with you. And I want to see your opinion of it, and also how it could be something maybe even more than what we're talking of with these galleries, because I think that it might even been a hall of records. There might be more to it. And I had this, I don't know if you want to call it, I definitely am kind of psychic, Gary. I've had a near-death experience when I was younger that kind of brought some abilities out of me that I've kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle over time. I know you come from a Christian, view and background, so I don't know how comfortable you are with talking about certain abilities, but I've had this interesting dream about a year ago, and it happened pretty much 3 times in a 2-month period. And then when I started to research it, I found out other people were having these experiences in their dream time, or astral, whatever you want to call, label it. But I had this reoccurring vision, right? That I woke up in a cold sweat, like it was blood-curdling real, Gary. I was in like a crystal fortress, like mountains of crystal around and everywhere. And there was this huge gallery, and there was these huge giants, but they were frozen in like a cryogenic stasis, like stuck, frozen in time. And they had this device on their head that looked like Princess Leia's ears, like that circle over her ears, but it was mechanical. And my impression were that they were awakening, and that they were awakening from a stasis, and that they were sleeping for possibly hundreds of thousands of years, and maybe even they were put to sleep on purpose, or had no choice, or something, while this earth goes through kind of a dark ages of war and this and that. And now that we're kind of going through a new shift on earth, and some people are going more towards the artificial intelligence, and some people are going more towards the spiritual route. Now they want to reawaken for this new shift that's upon us. And maybe that crystal fortress could be what Enoch is talking about when he goes maybe to even inner earth, or the ancient Agartha, what they talk about. And I was interested in, for your comments on that, and then after break we can continue from there.
Well, what's interesting about that is you see that ice castle and this demigod sort of imagery in the Superman series, right? In only it's in, I think, in the Arctic as opposed to the Antarctic. But that's just another allegory of the demigods and the giants of prehistory. But what you're really talking about is what we're hearing a lot of, and it's hard to get good, solid, substantiating evidence of, is the discoveries that have happened down in Antarctica, where they're talking about these Nephilim that are in stasis in these pyramids or crystal palaces, and that they're in stasis and they're starting to come back to life. So
there was pyramid. Like I went through I was watching the time, so I couldn't go through the whole story, but there was more to the vision. It had it was a crystal pyramids, but it was also water in front of the pyramid, and the water was digital, and there was like information moving through it, and the pyramid was, all the crystals were lighting up, and it was like connected to this headset thing that they had on. And I had this same exact dream like 3 times, and I've heard of other people talk about similar dreams, but never about that headset that looks like Princess Leia's ears. But then my buddy Masaki sent me some things from like ancient Japan or somewhere where these statues have these women with these devices over their ear that look like circular metal objects. And we're going to pick this right back up where we left off, right at this spot when we get back from break. If everybody wants to research Gary, the website is Genesis 6 Conspiracy.
Genesis 6 with the number 6.com.
Genesis 6 conspiracy.com. Yeah, okay. So everybody check Gary Wayne out at Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and you can find me at themysticalspiral.com like always. And this song is called Bulletproof by Far Radio Clouds. Spiral out.
Something wants me. are listening to Para X.
And we are back with the great Gary Wayne from Genesis6Conspiracy.com. And everybody, I would really recommend picking up the Genesis 6 Conspiracy from Amazon or from Gary's website, because it's really an encyclopedia of information that we're talking about now. And it's really an amazing book. And I just recently got it, and I have yet to really dive into it deep, because there's just so much, that I'm working on, and I really can't wait to crack into it, though. And next time we have Gary on by the end of the month, he's going to be back on June 30th for Fallen Angel Friday. I'm sure I'll be far into it by then. But so, Gary, let's pick this up where we left off. This vision. And for everybody that just joined us in the chat room and listening live, we were talking about the ancient Persian giants and this giant Argiok, who built a gallery of statues of these ancient giants. And Gary was connecting it to other, places and other civilizations that had similar lore. And then we got to talking about this vision that I had of these giants frozen in stasis and how they were reawakening, and this device that I saw on their head. And, it's interesting, Gary, that they talk about these giants that lived for thousands of years and even reigned for thousands of years in ancient Persia. And the one that they call Siamak, he was supposedly the first king, and he was murdered by his giant brother. And they're saying that he had this perpetual fire that was put on his tomb that would, contained his ashes, and that was, a never-ending fire. And a lot of Asian history and Asian researchers link this to where we got fire worship from. So I thought that was very interesting too.
Yeah. Again, the stories of these giants in prehistory are, just seemingly endless. But it also says in that account that there were, as you mentioned, two kinds of giants.
Yeah, two races or nations. Yeah,
two races, and so there's a lot of speculation, and there's not a whole bunch to back it up. There are accounts of what this other race of giants might have looked like. But there's not a lot of evidence to that. There's not a lot of surviving sort of reliefs and things like that that would guide you in that direction. So, but there's a lot of speculation that the other race was they didn't look like the dragons or the serpents as what most of the giants looked like, but they actually looked like lion men.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we go to that, because before we go to the Auriels or these lion mountain Auriel or lion people or the different names that we come up, it's interesting that they say that the next king on this 72 king, and then we can also go down the way that they have these 72 kings, these ancient Persian giants that they call the Solomons, and then we also have King Solomon, who has these 72 Goetia daemons that he worked with, and how they might be the disembodied spirits of these giants. When the giants passed, somehow they were trapped in this astral soul form and used as magic or some kind of technology to manipulate humanity and look at us as some kind of archonic influence over us, guardians over our consciousness, or some kind of influence over us. And I think that these 72 kings, giants, that when they passed, they were also used, and I think that's where the Solomon this name came from.
Well, typically all names, whether or not they're in Israel or elsewhere, they come out of history, and so you get names showing up in the Bible that are very, very strange. Like you have Gog and Magog, which are giant names, right? And so it's certainly possible, and who knows? It might just be a coincidence that these Suleimans or these demons are named maybe after Solomon later on, or maybe that's what the name of it was before. I mean, we really don't know.
Yeah, and who was this King Solomon? I mean,
Yeah.
outside of the Bible and the Apocrypha and the book of, those ancient books, we don't really know too much about him.
Yeah, the Quran does have a fair bit on him as well.
Yeah. Well, he was working with the jinn, which are basically the same thing as the Goetia, right? The jinn,
Yeah, there's two types of jinn, and one would be like these demon spirits as well.
That's what I'm talking about, those ones, because then they also have like the seraphim, the fire, the ones of fire.
Yeah.
And I think
when made from smokeless fire, those would be
and
the angels or the gods.
Yeah, and I think the reason why they say that, Gary, is because these are beings of antimatter, and when we talk about antimatter, we're talking about highly combustible. A little dot of it can just be explode into fire and flames, and I think these beings manipulate antimatter and live in the antimatter. Yeah,
I mean, they're very powerful beings with all sorts of powers that it's difficult for us to imagine this time. But when we talk about these 70 as demons, that makes a whole lot of sense when you look at whether it's in Taoism or in Greek heroes, which are the Titans, that when these Titans died, these heroes died, their spirits didn't go to sleep. And so they would come back and haunt the community or the realm that they were ruling over, and the people would do sacrifices and worship to pacify this demon spirit that is very upset that it no longer has a body. And in the Bible, we look at, if you take it literally, which I do, that these demons would come from the bodiless. They're the bodiless Nephilim, or the bodiless giants that died out. And out of the book of Enoch, it actually calls them the evil spirits and the demons from these bodiless giants. So again, you have this consistency coming out of ancient history, describing what's going on there, and that Solomon had the ability to control these demons with the power that he had. And that's why secret societies and the Gnostics like to draft Solomon as a magi, as one of the great grand masters of their secret societies and belief systems. Now, I don't believe that. I think he had the power of God with him to be able to do this, so that he could build the temple. And the Quran will talk about
the Temple Mount, right?
We'll talk about and Solomon actually drafting these demons to actually do the heavy lifting for building the temple.
In fact, I think he had, we can't really get into it now, but there's a story that's been passed down in my family about him imprisoning and releasing one of this, demons, and that ended up in Italy as this Saint Barbatos, and that cut down an ancient walnut tree that my family worshipped at a certain time. But not to go down that hole right now. That's a whole other story. But what I wanted to talk about with you with Solomon is also what you're talking about with the Temple Mount. I believe that they call one of the daemons or demons, whatever you want to call them, Asmodeus, and he was the one summoned to help build the Temple Mount, right?
Yes, that is the one that's named in the Quran, where I think that comes from.
Which I believe is some disembodied spirit of one of these giants, and they call this one giant who came second and who ruled for over 1,000 years, Hushank. And he was known as the prudent and the wise. And his dynasty was the one that rediscovered metals and stones. And he was known to have concealed giants in the bowels of the earth. So there's these stories in ancient Persia of them having some kind of storage facility in the inner earth or in the depths of the earth. And, in ancient Tibet, most ancient mystics have this lore of Agartha or Shambhala or some kind of ancient lore where it's from pole to pole is like a tube, some kind of inner earth and crystal palaces and all of that. So there's possibly that these giants are frozen in some kind of stasis in our inner earth.
Okay, do you want to know? You want me to take back where that name Asmodeus comes from?
Yeah, I would love that. And after that, I would like the remainder of the time we have to get into who the Auriel or these lion humanoids were that we find in the King James Bible and other ancient texts.
Sure. So Asmodeus is connected back to before the flood. And this is a mixture of mythology and mysticism and the Bible here, and in particularly the Jewish legends that Louis Ginsburg put together over 100 years ago. And so Nama, who is the daughter of Lamech of the Cain line and brother of Tubal-Cain, what she does is she marries a giant named Shamdan and produces a giant named Asmodeus.
Oh, wow. So that's exactly where the daemon name came from, Asmodai.
Yeah.
Wow, that is very interesting. See, I didn't know that there was a giant of that same name, Gary. That's really interesting. So that's definitely where the connect. And it's interesting that they call the 72 lesser keys of Solomon these 72 daemons or demons, and then you have 72 kings of giants in ancient Persia. That's not a coincidence. And they called those 72 kings the Solomons.
Yes.
And then you had the Solomon Islands. You had giant lore.
Yeah, absolutely. And where it's one of these sort of names that just sort of keeps going down through history. So there's a lot to it, and depending on what your perspective is you'll have a different view as who Solomon is. So
yeah. And then he had a couple others, like there's tales that he went to, what was it, Africa, and he had one of the Queen Sheba.
Mm-hmm.
And he was with her, and then they had the Solomon mines and all of these tales of him, but there's not too much real documents of his history and who he was and his birth and where he came from.
Yeah, well, there is a little bit, but it's very limited. But there is evidence that he's the son of David. So
well, do you think that Daniel is possibly related to Solomon in any way?
Oh, it's very, very likely. Daniel was a part of the aristocracy and of Judah, so as opposed to the northern tribes and the northern.
So he was like Daniel of Judah, basically. He was chosen over like 150 people, right? Or something like that. He was chosen.
Well, he is taken back to Babylon as a representative of the noble class and the highly educated, right? So he's likely connected back. I haven't done the genealogy search to see, I'm not even sure it's there to see how he directly links back, but he's part of the noble class. So
I'm gonna do maybe a YouTube discussion with you about Daniel one day. That's gonna be interesting. But let's the last 10 minutes, let's get into these lion humanoids that I wanted to speak of, and what you can tell us and please share with us, because I was so interested when I saw in the King James these tales of these lion humanoid Auriels, and it's interesting. They even have like Disney movies about lion Auriel, and you see it in Hollywood even. Yeah,
and so the account of these Ariels, as you're talking about, comes out of First Chronicles and Second Samuel, and slightly different accounts, but it putting them together, you get a little bit better story. So in Second Samuel, talks about the lion men of Moab that the mighty men of David are facing. Which and typically, if you're familiar with what the mighty men of David were doing, they were wiping out giants and the Philistines and the Amalekites, right? Yeah. So why are they fighting these lion men of Moab? So they're in this sort of giant sort of war, which is that other sort of connection back to giants, right? And it's at the time of Goliath, who's the giant we're talking about earlier. And so if you look at First Chronicles 12:8, when it says it looked like lion, when they look like lions, that comes from the Hebrew word Ari, Ariy, which again has that freaky connection to Ari that I used earlier, and Arian, right?
Yeah, and Orion, yeah. It's such a connect.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in 2 Samuel 23:20, when it talks about the lion men of Moab, that word is 739, and the first one was 738 out of Hebrew, out of Strong's dictionary. That actually is Ariel. And
Yeah.
that's defined as heroic, as in Nephilim, and as lion-like men. And what's interesting about that is the El, whether it's Michael or Gabriel or Azazel or all of these sort of gods coming out of the sort of Hebrew words coming forth, that El stands for angel or God, right?
Yeah.
So Ariel, if we've got two different types of Nephilim out there, and this definitely could be a Nephilim because it seems to be a Nephilim in that heroic application or a Nephilim application, because the Nephilim were the heroes of old, the mighty ones of old, men of renown, as you take that back into Genesis 6:4. Sounds like this could be denoting the lineage or the kind of Nephilim as being Ariel, because there's an angel Ariel that is in Jewish mysticism. It isn't in the Bible as, Ariel. I mean, you've got Uriel in some of the Apocrypha and in the Book of Enoch. But Ariel, as it comes down in its Hebrew meaning as an angel, is the Lion of God. So this is a supposed angel and known as the Lion of God. And you've got these lion-like men of Moab being essentially named after them, which is just a bizarre sort of coincidence. And many think that this was a giant, and we have this other source that says there was two kinds of giants. And this whole idea of lion imagery is not unknown in prehistory. There are many different kinds, and in Greek history you have the chimera coming out of Greek history, and it has the body and the head of a lion. It also has some other strange things, like having an extra head that looked like a goat with a serpent's tail.
And even the Scarlet Babylon woman that was supposed to be evoked from these Babylon workings, they call her the Scarlet Harlot. She came in on a chimera or some kind of headed beast, 6-headed walking tiger or something like that,
Yeah, and the Sphinx, which a lot of people also associate with a cherubim, and a cherubim has the face of a lion, a face of an ox, a face of an eagle, and a man.
Yeah, which cherubim, Lucifer, he was Lucifer was part him, right? He was part cherubim and seraphim, right?
Yes, and so you have the lion showing up there as well, and the Sphinx. A lot of people believe it didn't have the face of a head, but it could if it is a cherubim. But it has had a face of a lion, just that had the body of a lion.
Yeah.
And according to a lot of researchers, they think the Sphinx was built somewhere between 10,900 and 8,800 BC, which would be the age of Leo. And the Akaru who are descendants of Ra, were depicted with a lion type of hieroglyphs, right?
Yeah. And, wow, Gary, you do your homework, man. You got it.
So, I mean, even the glyphs go back to the Sphinx, and the Sphinx has a lion, and has the same lion hieroglyph that represents it in ancient Egyptian writing. And as you dig further into this, then you have lion men of Babylonia, of ancient Babylonia, that is talked about. Not a lot, but you can find a few records on that. And again, these individuals in Babylonia, which is the same area where I think Argent or Argiak come from, which is another one of the giants, Argent, that I mentioned in the Argiak story. They had the head of a lion and the body of a man and the feet of a bird. So I wonder whether or not that has anything to do with it. But all of these really strange beings that are talked about and shown as reliefs, the lion men of Egypt, I think it's called, pronounced Mahahis, Maahhes. M-A, the first two letters, stands for lion. And there's these reliefs of these lion-headed men in ancient Egypt, and they're believed to be the son of Ra.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, you have this going back to this realm, as and Ra has a few different depictions as well of different descriptions, from a bird head to some other strange images.
Yeah, he goes into like the underworld at night and then rises in the morning, and
yeah.
Yeah,
and then you get this, and then in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you get this King Humbada, and I don't know whether you're familiar with his description.
That's the Sumerian account, yeah.
Of the Epic of Gilgamesh, where
it's the flood, right? It's the flood tale.
Part of it, yeah. One of the tales is the flood. But Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they go to the cedar forest, right? And they're going to kill King Humbada. And the gods get really upset at him, but he's got the face and the paws of a lion. Right, and he's got bull horns, and he's got vulture claws, and he's covered in scales, and his tail is at the end is the shape of a phallus, and
he's like a genetic freak.
His phallus has a shape of the head of a serpent, as does the tail have the shape of a serpent. So I kind of mixed that up.
Baphomet, Baphomet is pictured like some androgynous type beast like that as well.
And so you've got these two types of angelic beings, where you've got the face of an eagle, as in the Anunnaki or the Thunderbird or the Tengu, and the feathered serpents, which could be a combination of the two, depending on which imagery you're looking at. And you've got these images of the cherubim that are somehow showing up in these different types of beings in prehistory. And there's many other weird beings in prehistory, but anyway, so I just wanted to make those connections, that there's a possibility that second race, if there was a second race, and there is a lot of circumstantial evidence to suggest that, actually look like lions.
Yeah, that's true, Gary, and I really appreciate this information that you've dug up, and your opinions and your theories that go along with it is pretty spot on and well researched. And it's interesting because I just looked it up. Now, in the 72 Lesser Keys of Solomon, in the 2 minutes we have left, the 32nd spirit is called Asmodai or Asmodei, and he is a great king and giant, they say, who's strong and powerful. And his spirit, this disembodied spirit, appears with 3 heads, and the first is like a bull, the second like a man, and the third like a ram, and also has the tail of a serpent. From his mouth that issues flames of fire. His feet are webbed like those of a goose. He sits upon an infernal dragon and bears in his hands a lance with a banner. So this is just like those beasts that you described, but only in a disembodied spirit form that is used for like magical, some kind of technology in the magical soul plane, and he can make one invincible, and he can build legions and build he's astronomy and geometry. He has sacred geometry and handcrafts and all these abilities that get summoned by using him. But there's a price. Anytime you contact a spirit like this, you're basically forming a contract for your soul.
You need to be careful. I would advise not to do it.
Never, not even to call upon them. Not
even to say their name. Yes.
Yep. And this has been a beautiful and amazing night. And we're going to have Gary back on June 30th for Fallen Angel Friday. Find Gary Wayne at the Genesis6Conspiracy.com. I want to thank my producer, Sarge. I want to thank Gary Wayne. I want to thank everybody in the chat room, everybody listening live out there in the universe. I want to say, you can say it with me, everybody, spiral out.